Howdy, readers. I'm Jason, and this is Chapter and Verse. So I'm here this evening to film my first ever buddy read video. And I did this buddy read with Jasmine from Jasmine's Reads. She's already made her video. I will link it in the description box below mine. But anyway, so we decided to read How to Be Both by Ali Smith. And as she said in her video, the reason that we settled on Ali Smith was because it seemed like we were the only literary booktubers who had yet to read Ali Smith. Even though she had been on our respective radars for quite some time, neither of us had ever gotten around to reading her. I have since learned from one of his videos that Neil Griffiths also has yet to read Ali Smith. So we weren't the last two. Now Neil Griffiths is the last one. I'm going to just jump right in. I've got my notes. I had to kind of arrange my thoughts. And so forgive me if I look down periodically. Here's the edition that I read. I'm going to begin talking about, just briefly, about what I didn't like. Okay, so here is a novel that, it's about many things. But one of the principal things this book is about is grief, okay? It is about how a teenage girl in particular, but also her father and her little brother to lesser extents, it's about how a teenage girl is navigating her grief over the loss of her mother. So a book that's dealing with that should move me more than this book did. Yeah, I was never moved to tears. I was never kind of choked up. And as readily as I fell into the novel, I felt like my heart was kind of left out of the equation a little bit by Ali Smith. And the reason for that, I think, is that the novel it's deeply intellectual. It's deeply playful. But it's intellectual, I feel like, to a fault. It's intellectual in a way that kind of leaves its soul outside of the frame, if that makes sense. And frankly, a novel that's about grief, or that is in part about grief, I want the soul to be in the frame. I want the soul of the book to impose itself on me. And this one didn't. It was a little bit like Immortality by Milan Kundera in that way. Now, I'm a huge fan of The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Kundera. But Immortality I just found, and I wanted to love that book. I wanted to like that book. But I just couldn't. I just felt like it was so kind of wrapped up in what it was trying to do intellectually. It was so kind of drunk on its own cerebral games that I was never able to kind of key into it. Now, that's not true of this book. I very much so was able to kind of find my way into the groove of Ali Smith's novel. But again, I just wasn't moved. The first half of the book, which dealt with that navigation of grief by the teenage girl named George, it was a little too clinical. It was a little too cold, maybe. So that was really my only major qualm with the book. Now, on to what I liked about the book. I really loved how deeply elusive it was. There were literary and cinematic allusions all throughout this thing. Probably the most important one, and certainly the most obvious one, although it took me a little while to figure it out, was the Antonioni, the Michelangelo Antonioni reference, right? So when George's mother takes George and her little brother Henry to Italy to see this particular work of art, which becomes incredibly important in the book. The second half of the book ends up being about the artist who painted this fresco, or who contributed to the painting of this fresco. And anyway, but we learn when they're there in Italy that this spot that they've gone to was either the birthplace of or the home of an Italian filmmaker that George's mom loved. So immediately my mind went to Fellini. He's the most famous Italian filmmaker. But then I thought, George's mom doesn't really seem like a Fellini kind of person. She just doesn't seem like a Fellini fan to me. So then I was thinking, well, is it Pasolini maybe? Is it Antonioni? And I wasn't quite sure. But then there comes a reference to a poster or an image of an actress who worked with this Italian director that George's mother has framed on her wall. And I thought, it's probably Antonioni, and the actress is probably Monica Vitti. And then sure enough, right? So later in the book, near the end of the first half of the book, George is watching some films that her friend slash girlfriend has left her before moving to another country. I think they moved to Denmark, and she's left George these films to watch, right, to kind of act as surrogate mothers, really. And the film is never named, but George is watching this movie, and it's described, and it's clearly L'Avventura, right? The Antonioni film, L'Avventura. This is our Criterion DVD of it. And the thing about L'Avventura is, it's a really inscrutable, beautiful film, right? It's a movie that kind of operates according to its own logic, and in the end, it's really open to interpretation. So L'Avventura and How to Be Both are similar in the sense that both of them are kind of very cryptic puzzles, really, sort of narrative puzzles, and both of them are works of art that deal very expressly with absence and what do we do in the wake of absence, in the wake of disappearance. I'm always a sucker for novels and films that make me feel smart because they're alluding to things or referencing things, oftentimes obliquely, that I get. Because far too often works of art are referencing things that I'm completely oblivious to and don't even know they're referencing anything at all. So that was fun. The other works of art I really feel like kind of appear in the novel in some way, shape, or form. I really felt like the second half of the book, aesthetically, right? I mean, insofar as the poetry of its language was concerned, but also just the tone, the voice. It felt very Michael Ondaatje-like to me at times, which is a really high compliment coming from me. In particular, it reminded me at times of The English Patient and Anil's Ghost. So those two Ondaatje novels I felt like were kind of specters kind of hovering over How to Be Both, at least the second half of the book. And the other work of art that the book really reminded me a lot of, in particular the final scene in How to Be Both, was Virginia Woolf's novel To the Lighthouse. In the final scenes of both of these books, we have works of art that are rent. And in that act of rending, something new is made. Life is breathed into something that had been static and stagnant, and it's quite refreshing. In fact, the ending of To the Lighthouse, that last 3 pages or whatever it was, 4 pages, really elevated that book for me from 3 stars to 4 stars, almost from 3 stars to 5 stars, actually. The ending of How to Be Both didn't work quite as well for me. It wasn't as clear. In fact, the very last page of the book, there was one line: the seed still unbroken, the star still unburnt, the curve of the eye bone of the not yet born. Hello, all the new bones. Hello, all the old. Hello, all the everything to be made and unmade, both. But that line, hello, all the everything, it's just too inclusive. Like, it's just too neat. It's just too pat, right? It's not making any kind of real decision, right? Which I suppose is in part the theme of the book, how to be both. And the novel explores that theme in just really beautiful ways, right? Androgyny, kind of fluid gender, this notion of how can someone be dead, but still live in our memories so clearly as if they're actually there. So the novel really works with that beautifully, but in the end, I felt like it needed to come down. It needed to come down on one side of the fence or the other, and this idea of everything, right? It's just too cosmic. It's just a little too cosmic. The thing about the end of Virginia Woolf's novel is that act by the painter, it's decisive, and there was nothing kind of decisive in the ending of How to Be Both. Even the rending of the work of art, with these two girls kind of twining themselves up in it and then splitting it, it felt more haphazard. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about with respect to the book is the structure. So as Jasmine said in her video, there are some copies of this book out there that begin with George's story in the modern day, and then the second half of the book is Francesco's story during the Renaissance. That was the copy I read. That was the copy Jasmine read. And apparently some copies have that reversed. Now, if that's the case, I don't see how that could work. I don't see how the novel could work telling Francesco's story first. So in the novel, as is, okay, with the modern story first, we have this fresco that George's mother becomes obsessed with. And so there's the suggestion of a painter, right? They know virtually nothing about this painter, apart from the fact that this painter requested an increase in his salary for the work that he did on this mural. We have George and her girlfriend H speculating about the identity of this artist, and trying on possibilities, what the artist might have been like, what the artist's circumstances might have been. Really, just kind of exploring the idea of creating a persona responsible for this artwork. And then in the second half of the book, we have Ali Smith summoning forth this artist's identity. And for all we know, I mean, it's completely invented. It's completely created. But what's lovely about this is that in that second half of the book, we hear time and again that Francesco, in having been taught by the masters, right, from the books on picture making, etc., that what you do in creating a person in a painting is you start with a skeleton, and then you put musculature on the skeleton, and then you cover it with flesh. And with the novel structured as it is, with George's story first and then Francesco's story second, we see Ali Smith doing that very thing in the novel, in the narrative, right? So it begins with the suggestion of the artist, right? The skeleton of the artist. And then we see George and H, through their kind of extrapolating possible identities for the artist, beginning to kind of put muscles on the skeleton. And then in the end with Ali Smith actually kind of bodying forth this painter, Francesco, we see it finally fully realized, right? This person, this character, this figure, fully realized with flesh as well, and I think that's really beautiful. And if the stories were reversed, I'm not sure how it would work. I'd be curious to read that version of the novel, so I may seek it out at some point just to see if it would work. But I'm inclined to think that the prizes it didn't win, the judges may have had that copy of the book where Francesco's story was told first, and the prizes it did win, the judges likely had the version that Jasmine and I read. Who knows if that's true, but that would make sense to me. Anyway, that was How to Be Both, my first buddy read ever on BookTube. Thank you, Jasmine, for doing this buddy read with me. And I look forward to many more in the future. To the rest of you, I will see you soon. Have a good weekend, everybody.